Elekei Elekeim shalei l'seina zimahu. The God of these people hates zimo, hates nus, chulu, etc. Rasha doesn't continue, and he says, "Kediisa b'chelik b'sifri." The continuation is like it says in Perek Chelik. Chelik is Mesichte. Mesichte Sanhedrin is Perek in Chelik in Mesichte Sanhedrin Perek Chelik. It's the 11th Perek, and it's Sifri. Now I'm going to read a little bit what it says in the Gemara in Perek Chelik and what it says in Sifri, because there's going to be negeya to part of the Sikha later on. In Gemara in Sanhedrin, the Gemara says, Omer lehem, that Bilam said to them, Elekeim shalei l'seina zimahu, that their God hates nus, and these Yidden, they like linen clothing. He told them what to do, how to get the Yidden, schlepperein the Yidden. And he said, make tents where you will have the Zaina standing there, and you can have 2 women in each tent, and they will be selling linen clothes. The older one should stand outside, the younger one should stand inside. And when the Yidden, after they eat and drink, they'll go for a walk, they'll pass by these tents. This older woman will say, would you like to buy the pishton? And then the younger woman from inside will also come. The younger woman will give a cheaper price. The older woman will charge more. She will charge less. So they will get involved with the younger one, with the deals. It'll happen once, twice, a few times. That's how it happened, Taka. And that's how they got involved. And then they gave them to drink wine. They brought the jars of wine. Well, they said, you know what? It was before the Easter of drinking Deutsche wine. So they said, this young woman said to the Jewish men who were there, drink some wine. So they drank wine, they got drunk, and then automatically they got them to do the Aveda, side Aveda of Znu, side Aveda of Balpeh. This is what it says in Perek Chelik, as a continuation of what the Gemara of Rasha brings here, that he gave him the Eitzah that Eibusha hates Zimo, and like it says in Perek Chelik, which is the continuation of the story. But Rasha also says, it says in Sifri. Now in Sifri it says, it doesn't say the whole Hemshech of the story, but this is what it says. Actually, it starts off with the same words as Rasha says. Rasha takes it from the Sifri. Ma hoya dvar Bilam. In Sifri it says, what were the words of Bilam? Omerlem, he said to them, even if you bring all the Hamenis, which all the people of the world, you can't overcome them. And the same thing, maybe you're more than the Mitzrayim. Come, I'll give you an Eitzah what to do. And he says, what is the Eitzah? The Eibishter doesn't like Znus, so make sure that you will be involved. I'll tell you how to do it to be involved in Zima. And the Eibishter already will punish them. And he doesn't go into the whole story what happened. This is what it says in Sifri. And Rasha here, when he quotes the beginning of what Bilam said, he says only that Bilam said to them that Gashmias in war you will never win. I'll give you an Eitzah, Eibishter Zima, etc., like it says in Chelik and in Sifri. So the Rebbe explains like this. Dos was Rasha. Rasha already wrote before in Parshas Bolak. Rasha wrote already the whole thing that Bilam said, that it was Bilam's advice that he told him what to do in order to get Eden to get involved in Znus, etc., etc. So why does Rasha have to repeat it here? Rasha explained it already. He said it in Parshas Bolak of the Werte from Bilam. It says at the end of Bolak, Bilam said to Bolak, come, I will give you advice. And Rasha says, what was his advice? This advice. And Rasha says it again. When it says the Eden started having Znus with the daughters of Meyav, Rasha repeats it again. So if Rasha already said that this was all based on what Bilam said, and says what Bilam said, why does Rasha have to repeat it here a third time? So the Rebbe says, that's not a problem. It's a movement. That we understand. For Munzer Posik is their mokif manim elen tesaruis. Because our Posik, that's the source where Rasha knows it. How does Rasha know that in the previous psukim? Because of what it says here about Saz Bilam. The Rasha zog by the Posik licho yatzacho, as Rasha himself says, when he says by the Posik in Parsha Bolak, where he said, come, I'll give you an advice what to do. So Rasha says that it was the advice of Bilam that did it. And Rasha says that, hey, I'll prove to you, Shebilam hisi eitzezu lachshilam bezimo, that it was Bilam who gave him this eitzeh to make him stumble with Aved of Znus. Sharei Nemer, because it says, and he quotes the Posik in Parshas Matos that we're learning now. Hein hein ha'oil of Bnei Yisrael b'dvar Bilam. That they were the ones that caused the Yidden to do the Aveda b'dvar Bilam. So since the whole source of what Rasha says it over there comes from here, so here in the Posik itself, Rasha obviously has to say it. So it's not a problem why Rasha repeats it. But we have to understand why does Rasha here bring the whole lengthy Inyan He said, I feel like even if you bring all the armies in the world, it won't work. And you're not more than the Mitzrayim, and they couldn't do it. You certainly can do it. Because it says there that they had 600 chariots, special chariots, chosen chariots, and they couldn't do it. Why is all that negeya? Vosi does bechlal negeya, it's in Peter from Posik. What's that all negeya? All these pratim, that how he said to them that the war, you bring all the people in the world, you can't win. And with Mitzrayim, what's it negate to the pasuk? Rasha should have said, very simple. Idvar Bilam, Bilam. Something like this was Eitz of Bilam. And then Rasha had to say it because this is the source, but he didn't have to go into the detail. Second question. If Rasha does, for some reason, want to bring down this part of what Bilam said, or to bring in those dort, but it would fit more to bring it over there. Whoever is Mefarish Devin some Eshtamo, what Rasha explains is the first time. And the pasuk where it says in Parshas Bola, come, I'll give you an advice. So Rasha says the advice was that the Eibush that hates Znus, etc. Rasha doesn't bring to this whole thing here that he said with the armies you will not win because no army will overcome them, etc. etc. And if Rasha feels it's important for us to know that, he should have brought it the first time. Also, you have to understand something. Before it was a kasha, like something extra. And now he's saying a diyukim. Number one, das was Bilam had gesagt, when Bilam said that if you're going to bring all the Hamenas, all the people of the world, you still won't overcome them. And he gave a reason to prove it. I'll show you, I'll prove to you that no army will overcome them, even if you have all the armies in the world. Why you're more than the Mitzrayim? In Mitzrayim, the Mitzrayim couldn't do it, so you certainly couldn't do it. What kind of raya is that? You know, the raya nicht mehr niden. The raya, the proof that he's bringing that they can do it from the Mitzrayim is no raya. Atam alein seid taka nicht in Rubin Mitzrayim. You yourself, in other words, Meyav, Midian, whatever, was not more than the Mitzrayim. Aber mit kol ameine shebeim seid sie gewiss im Rubin Mitzrayim. But if they would bring all the armies in the world, they would be more. For them, the Mitzrayim seid doch gewinn, blaze ein Nummer, the Mitzrayim were one nation. And wie great is eine gewinn ihre Hamenes demos, as much as people that the Mitzrayim had, they're less than all the armies in the world, all the people in the world. What did he say? You can, even if you bring all the people in the world, or all the armies in the world, all the nations in the world, you won't overcome them. The raya is, because the Mitzrayim couldn't overcome them, so you certainly can't. Why, you're more than Mitzrayim? Sure, if they'll bring all the Hamenes in the world, they will be more than Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim was one nation. If they're going to bring all the nations, sure, there'll be more. So what do they mean to say? Noch the kasha is more. But we learned earlier in Pasha Shlach, as Moshe Rabbeinu had gesagt, the Moshe said to the Eibush by the Chatam Araglim, David wanted to destroy the Eden. So Moshe said to the Eibush, don't do it. Because you know what's going to happen. If you're going to kill the Eden in the Midbar, the nations will say, that the reason Hashem killed him in the Midbar because he didn't have the power to bring him into Eretz Yisrael to fight with the nations in Eretz Yisrael. And Rasha says, but you know what they will say? Even though you overcame Parei, but it's not the same with the 31 kings in Eretz Canaan. And they will say that you felt you could overcome Parei, Mitzrayim, but not the nations of Eretz Yisrael. So from here we see that the nations of Eretz Yisrael actually were more than Parei, stronger than Parei. So certainly that Mitzrayim is not the same as all Amenes in the world. The 31 kings in Eretz Yisrael themselves were stronger, as we see here. Certainly they're going to get more. So what does it mean? If you're going to, even if you'll try to get all the nations in the world, all the people in the world, you won't overcome them. Why? Because the Mitzrayim couldn't, and you're not better than Mitzrayim, because the Mitzrayim had 600 wagons. On the other hand, the Balder Vilmatayas and the Meribu in the Gvura from the Mitzrayim. On the other hand, he does try to show how strong Mitzrayim was, and he wants to say Mitzrayim is stronger than you. Why does Rasha just say that know how strong Mitzrayim was? They had 600 chosen wagons. The pasuk there says that the Mitzrayim chased the Eden with 600 special chosen wagons, and it says, and all other chariots of Mitzrayim and soldiers on all of them. So when Rasha wants to show how Mitzrayim was strong, why does he only bring the part of the pasuk that he had 600 special wagons? What about the rest? He says, it's self-understood as nor aribu mufluk v'rechev Mitzrayim, but you can't noch yogen narusruf nazam meire, by Yuru made by Sheish Meis, Ella, the Gamer Agvorim, the Gamer Brav. It's self-understood that it wasn't just 600. There must have been a great amount of wagons, because if these Mitzrayim were able to chase 600,000 Yidden, much more than 600,000 men, from 20 to 60, and then you had the women and children, and you had the Erev Rav, so many millions of people, and they were able to chase them and make them scared. Must have been a whole amount of chariots, a lot of soldiers. So there were much more than the 600 chariots. And if Rashi wants to show that Bilam said that they're so strong, Mitzrayim, why didn't he bring the whole pasuk? Why does he just bring the first pasuk at the beginning of the pasuk, 600? You could say, when Rashi says that they had 600 chosen chariots, Rashi doesn't mean the number 600 that he brings. Nor as the Sheish Mei is eine gewähnte Rechav Bocher. 600 were special ones, a special in the group. But the funny verstandig, wie Grace given die Zoll von ganz Chel berechnet sein. If the best ones were 600, you could imagine how much more there was. So B'meila, maybe Rashi doesn't mean just the number 600. He means the beginning of the pasuk, and that's enough to tell us that he had much more, because if 600 were the best, there must have been a big elam. He says, aber fortnit glatik is still not clear, not simple. For him, demot wollte das Rashi gedacht, meram sei durch Meises sein der Wort begemes. So if that's what Rashi meant, he should have at least said, as it says by them, 600 rechav bochur begemer, etc. Because he didn't mean the rest of the pasuk. He just maybe didn't have to say it, but at least he should have hinted it with begemer. Or the chalapochas nicht sagen dem Loschen shehoye mei sheish meis. Shouldn't have said that they were 600. There were 600, but Gita Nord Zemenia that das is given a ganze mitzvah. When you say that they were 600, is mashman, not that there were 600 special ones, and then there were more. That Loshen is a Loshen that seems that they were 600. He should have said not another Loshen, a different Loshen. Like it says in Sifri, from welchem is Volkena verstehen, as meant mehr wie dem Dosik mitzvah. From what we understand, he means more than 600. He should have said that when the game of time, it says they were 600 Rechav Bochur, and we understand that there automatically must have been the whole army was more. Why does Rashi not even mention that? Not the gamer, and he says Hoyu. Third question. What's the Loshen Beye Basirach Meitze? What the Loshen Rashi? The Bilam said, come, and I'll give you an advice. We mean come. He said, I'll give you an advice. We mean come. What's the meaning of come? Fourth kasha. Rashi is Meisi B'chulu. Rashi says at the end when he says that, he said, I'll give you an Eitzah, because Hashem, their God, hates Znus, B'chulu, etc. And after the etc., he says, Kedeisa B'chelik B'sifri. Like it says in the Gemara in Sanhedrin in Perek Chelik, and as it says in Sifri. The pashtus batzitzir that siyum zum wort bechulu. Rashi says, like it says in Chelik, any sifri goes on the bechulu. In other words, Rashi, a lot of times you do that. If you want to bring a beginning, and you really mean to look up the rest, you write the beginning, and you say the rest look up in the source. So here when he says that this is what he said, that Davish hates zima, etc. Like, so the like it says in Chelik and sifri means the etc. The weiter dicke Prote Inyan, this is eine Doi in Perek Cheluk and Sifri, means I'm telling you the beginning that they said Hashem hates Zima, etc. Look up the Hemshech, the next few words in Cheluk and Sifri. Is nicht wohl, don't understand. Was ist denn geht, der Riches hat die Burim in Cheluk, und es ist nicht genug zum Zeigen, sondern zum Hemshech, was steht in Sifri. Why is Rashi interested to tell us, look in Cheluk? As I said, that's why in the beginning of the year I read what it says in Perek Cheluk. All it goes into the details there, how they convinced the Yidden to do the Averis. That he gave them Neitze, you should have two tents, and in the tent should stand a young woman and an older woman. Try to tell them to play Pishta, and all this. Why is it Rashi here negate to know that? How this whole thing went. In Sifri, Taka continues, doesn't say how it went, but he just says that they told him that the Zima, see that they do Zima, and they will be upset. But what it says in Chelik is not negate. I feel that Rashi will bring in Eich von Chelik, even if Rashi wants to bring from there too. But the gedacht Magdim seinen Ziehen von Sifri. He should have first quoted the Sifri and then Chelik. Why? Weil, number one, dort Retze Behem Schapiro from Unterposik. In Sifri, whatever it says in Sifri is pshat is on this posik. It's a Sifri on Parshas Matos on this posik that Rashi says. So if you want to quote something, so you quote something at first, whatever it's explained in Chazal on this posik. Second thing, von dort is genommen geworden, der ganze Dibur von Rashi Echas Chalosei. Actually, the whole thing that Rashi says, he took from Sifri. Even the beginning of Rashi. When Rashi says, Omer Lem, first he said to him, people bring in all the armies, etc. It's all that is written in Sifri. Dagegen in Chelik is the Arichas HaProtim nor in Hemshach to the Kem Shalin Zimahu. In Gemara Chelik, there it only continues after he said the Eibishter hates Zima. I'll tell you how to get them to do Zima. Doesn't say there this whole beginning that he said if you bring in the armies it won't work because you see you're not stronger than the Mitzrayim. In Sifri it says that. So if Rashi does want to refer to something which he didn't say, he should have referred to Sifri first. From them is Mucha. From that we understand. Since Rashi first says Chelik and then Sifri, shows Ados was Rashi Zoka the Isi be Sifri. Where Rashi says like it says in Sifri, meint and nit mit signs and the Mokeh von Ascholos Pirush Omer Lamafilatem. It didn't mean that look up what I wrote, you'll find it in Sifri. In other words, I wrote that Bilam said if you bring in all the armies it won't work, etc., etc. Look in Sifri, you'll find it. That's not what Rashi does it. And why Taka doesn't Rashi do it? If Rashi brings it, obviously, the Pshat itself tells you that. We don't see how. We'll see later. Rabbi will explain. But the Pshat itself tells you that. The Mele Rashi doesn't have to quote the Sifri to back up the words that he said, that if you bring all the armies, it won't work. But he also doesn't mean the other words when he said that the Eibishter hates Nus and Mele see that they do Nus. Anything that the Sifri adds to those words is included in what it says in Perek Chelik. So why does Rashi Bachal bring what it says in Sifri? So the Rebbe says a new thing here. It's not the Sifri on this pasuk. It's not this Sifri. Normally you learn, look at the Sifri, you'll see the Hemshech, because for that reason Rashi doesn't have to bring Sifri. Nor what Rashi, when he quotes Sifri, so an Inyan is Sifri, was is verbunden mit dem Inyan, was Retze Bechelik. He quotes what the Gemara says in Chelik. As we said, that the whole thing that says there, what he told him, how to convince the Eden to do the Averis. Concerning something, it says in Chelik, look in Sifri, you'll find something to back that up. The Hainu, in Klala Inyan from Elokeim, Shalayla Seinazimu. It says something in Sifri in connection to the general idea that he said Eibishter hates Znus. In that, look up in the Sifri. It's not to look up the story or the words that he said. It's a backing up. We don't know yet what the Rebbe is saying here. He's just giving us the point. It's not the Sifri. It's in Sifri. It says something which is negaya to this whole idea that Bilam said Eibishter hates Znus. But the Bible, we have all these kashas. The beer is to explanations like this. The chilik of pashas between the posik of Pasha Seinu to the posik in Pasha Bolok. The difference in pashas between the posik and Pashas Matos concerning the inyan that Bilam gave the Eitzah versus the way it's in Pashas Bolok. In Pashas Bolok state lecho I otzacha. In Bolok it says this is a conversation between Bilam and Bolok. Bilam says, that's what the posik says. Bilam says to Bolok, come, I will give you advice. The Rebbe is Rashi Mafarish nor Mahio Eitzah. So Rashi, if he thinks Shutashal Mikra, and the Pasuk says, I'll give you an advice, so Rashi is going to explain, what is the advice? And the advice is, Elakeim Shalayla Seinazimu. And Rashi has to tell it, because if the Pasuk is advice, we don't see what, in Pasuk it doesn't say what the advice is. So Rashi, Shutashal Mikra, explains, what's the advice? The Eibishter hates Znus, try to see that they do Znus. Like in the Pasuk Parsha Seina, on the other hand, the Pasuk in our Parsha, steht nicht about Sas Bilam. The Pasuk doesn't say that these were the women that caused the Yidden to do Averes with the Eitzah of Bilam. Eitzah is advice. Nor Bidvar Bilam, the words of Bilam. Is Mashme, Achazame mit der Eitzah, is given Advar, Adibur from Bilam. From there is Mashme, he spoke. Eitzah is one thing. So whatever he said, what to do is an Eitzah. There must be some other discussion that he had. It says Bidvar Bilam. Something that has to do with the Eitzah, some dibur. Oh, so in Pshuta Shemikra we see there is some conversation that he had besides the actual advice that he gave. Over there, Rashi doesn't have to say. It doesn't say there that there was any conversation. But here it says that there was a conversation besides advice. And from them, what the state b'shaychet zetaynes Meish. And since in our parsha, where did Meish Rabbeinu use this word that they made the Yidden sin? Bidvar Bilam, with the conversation of Bilam, it was said, Moshe said, in connection to his complaint. He said, how to come you didn't kill the woman? They were the ones that caused the problem. And he said, they caused the problem with the advice, but it doesn't say the advice, with the words, with the conversation of Bilam. So Moshe Steiner was, why didn't Muhammad didn't kill the woman? Since this was said in connection to why you didn't kill the woman when you went to war, is muchach the Dvar Bilam is Negeya Dafkedo. Shows that the conversation of Bilam is Negeya here. Because then you could ask, if Taka the Torah is trying to tell us that there was extra conversation beside the eight, so why didn't the Torah say it like in the beginning? Because over there it's not Negeya. Over there he gave advice and we know what advice is. Here, seems like here, because of the Teichen in which it's talking about, is Negeya, the whole conversation, Negeya to the Taina of Moshe, why you didn't kill him. What does that mean? So I'll just say by heart before, what the Rebbe is going to try to bring out, that what the women did and the advice of Bilam was that they are part of a war. What they did, the women did, is a Muhammad against the Eden. And when the Eden went now to war, this was like a Hemshech. There was a war. They tried to fight the Eden, and the Eden went and took revenge. And I'll explain what it means. The Rebbe is Rashi Mefarish, not nor the Eitzef and Bilam, not even Dvar Bilam. Since it says Dvar Bilam, Rashi explains not only the advice, there must have been a conversation. What's the conversation? Omer Lem Bilam said to them, even if you bring all the armies in the world, you won't succeed. That was what brought Bilam to give the Eitzah. If the armies won't succeed, the Eibush doesn't like Nus, and I'll give you the Eitzah how to overcome that. In other words, since this is here in our parsha, Negei, as I said before, to the war, that's why Rasha says, he started off by saying, you really want to fight a war. But you can't fight a war because no matter how many people, how many soldiers you'll get, it won't work. So I'm giving another advice how to fight the war. Meaning like this. Das border is like this. Explanation was there. Mesha said, why did you let the females, the women live? They were the ones for the Eden to have the problem. Negeo what Bilam said concerning the Avodah Zorah, and that's what brought by Hiyam gave about Das Hashem, that brought the plague by Hashem, etc., etc. Is given nicht nur der Fall, was im Bover Machshel given Eden und gebracht dem Agefer. Moshe Steiner wasn't that, they did something bad before, and they caused the Eden to die. They caused the plague, like caused when they did. So now we're going to go take revenge for something that they did. So Rashi is trying to tell us that's not what it was. The tiny is given b'shaycha to the Milchama was mit gefiert it's mit Midian. It is in connection to the war. The Eibishter sent him to fight a war with Midian. And the father is vayiksav meishal pkudei achayel aboyim mitzvah Milchama. That's who was he angry at the generals who led the war. And he said, you should have killed these women because we're at war with them. That's what he wants to say. Because hey, those was the Midyanim of the Shikni same listeners. This is the Midyanim send their daughters for Znus. This is how they want to have a war with Eden. And to destroy them. That is exactly the conversation of Bilam. This is what Bilam told them. You're fighting a war. I want to give you advice how to fight the war. He told them, with a physical war, you will not win. That's why he started the saying. You bring all the armies in the world, try to win with this way the war, you won't work. Even if you bring all the soldiers in the world, it won't work. And the Rabbi is that's why I'll give you a Netzah how to fight the war. Like that, this likes doesn't like Znus, and Bemela, this is going to be the war. The daughters, the women, were the ones that led the war. This was a war. Through this, they fought the war. When the Rebbe is done again, so here we have to have not only what Bilam said to do Bepel, we have to have the Dvar Bilam, the conversation that Bilam started off by saying, you can't win the war physically, you have to win the war spiritually. So in order to explain why Moshe Rabbeinu was upset against those that let the women live, he told them they're the ones that were at fault. He tried to say why you should have killed them. In war, those soldiers that's fighting with you, you kill. These women were like soldiers in the war. Where do we see that they're part of the war? So the Pasuk has to describe it, explain it by saying that Bilam explained to them how to fight the war. He started off, you want to win a war, but with the physical war with soldiers, you won't win. That explains that when he gave the Eitzah, it wasn't Stam and Eitzah how to, they wish to be angry at Eden. He gave him Eitzah how to do the war. So therefore, in the Parshas over there, it's not Negeya what he said. Who cares if it's a war or not? He gave him the Eitzah. Here, when Moshe Rabbeinu was upset why they didn't kill him, at the time of war, Here the Pasuk has to tell us, Rashi explains that why was it upset at the time of war? Why they didn't kill them? Because this advice that Bilam gave was part of a war. And if it's part of the war, and they were fighting the war, the women were the ones that were doing the war. Rashi brings the Prota deeper from Bilam. This explains why Rashi brings the details of what Bilam said. Amarlam, what did Bilam say? Bilam said, even you'll bring all these nations in the world, one year, or all the people of the world, you'll never win them. That he didn't need proof. See, Rabbi is learning different pshat in Rashi than we always learn. We always learn, Rashi said, you'll never win the Eden. You bring all the soldiers in the world, you won't win. Araya that you'll not win, because you're not stronger than the Mitzrayim. And the Rebbe asked, wait a minute, how can I that? Mitzrayim is one nation. If you bring all the nations in the world, you will win. So he says, no, that doesn't need Araya. When he said you will not win, that doesn't need Araya. But in Bolok Chimkazem, Bolok Anuder, he saw, as I feel a Sichaveg, even the two nations, Sichaveg, the starkste Malachim was ein Kolodem Yochel Kofshin, the strongest kings, and no king could ever conquer them. Und wenn man gedungen zu verhitten von the Eden. They were hired by the other nations to protect them from the Eden. Haben die Eden sie beigekommen and even overcame them in a very wondrous way. At the ganze wurde für sich haben kein Betreff nicht gehabt, so much that Eden won that the whole strength of Gesichnek didn't mean anything. Wissen Sie doch schön, als wurde Gashmi sei in Aribe bekam, es sei eine starke Beiches, wird nicht helfen, if zu beikommen Eden. So that didn't need a raya. When he said all the nations in the world won't help, they didn't need a raya for it. They know that no army, as strong as it is, whether it's physically strong, talking about the physical army, whether it's strong, in Kamus, many soldiers, or strong be'echos, which means strong in quality, you won't win. That's what he told them as a fact. That doesn't need a raya. But Bilam could not have just stopped there and say, well, you'll never win the war through a physical war, because they would have another advice. Bolok and Midian would have some kind of svara that they would be able to overcome. You're telling me that a physical war will not win. Fine. But they would say, they knew a physical war will not win, maybe a spiritual war. How do you have a spiritual war? Das heißt, means like this. Just like Midian, Bolok hired Bilam to chase the Eden away. Like he said, go curse this nation. And how did they think that Bilam will be able to do it? With the spiritual power he had. He's a Novi, and he knows what's going on in Lamaila. So that's what they had in mind. They can't help us. So when they saw Bilam can't help, they still thought, they thought, they thought maybe we'll find others. So he knew that with Kashmiris you can't win. But with Ruchnis, Bilam was a Ruchnistic person and you couldn't win. I'll find other people, better people than him. So by saying only Bilam would say that you can't win with a physical war is not enough. So they said, good, we'll find a Ruchnistic war. Bilam entered. That's why Bilam made it so that they shouldn't have such a question. Are you stronger than the Mitzrayim that had 600 chosen chariots? And that's all Bilam meant. He didn't mean the beginning and they had more soldiers. But that you don't have to think raya. A lot of soldiers they know they won't win. It didn't mean to show so much soldiers, so many chariots, 600. The physical power and how much soldiers they had. Nor by saying that they had 600 chosen chariots, that was a ruchnisdike thing that they had. A ruchnisdike schuz that they had. And the Rashi is befarish, Rashi already explains. Rashi asks in Parsha B'Shalach, it says that by Dever and by Borod, all the animals died. So how do they have animals to fight, to chase the Eden? So Rashi says, the Pasuk says that Moshe said that in order to protect their animals, take them inside. So there were Mitzrayim who were Yorei Dvar Hashem. They feared the words of Hashem. They trusted Hashem, and they took it in. Now they were Frum Goyim. They listened to Hashem. They trusted Hashem. Here it's not Negeya how many soldiers there were. Soldiers. Here, there's a Kayach Ruchni. By taking these 600 chariots. This was a Kreach Ruchni that these people had, that they were Yored Bar Hashem. Und Nafal Pekein hat das nicht geholfen. And it didn't help. Bashazi haben sich angeheben mit Iden, haben sich gehabt a bitter and stuff. And they started up with Iden, they had a bitter end. So Bilam said to them, you might say, if I just tell you physical soldiers won't work, good, you're going to tell me you'll find some spiritual. You can't win them even spiritually. Because you see, Pare tried to win them spiritually with bringing these 600 chariots from the Yored Bar Hashem, it didn't work. The Mele is moving as Hotten cannot to suchen as Zelcha was Maruchen Gemeinde. So Bilam Bolok was telling Bilam, so there's no need to find somebody else with a spiritual mile and durch sie beikommen Eden and through the spiritual ones to overcome the Eden. While in them meaning seien sie nicht mehr in der Mitzrayim. All these spiritual people you might get will not be more, will not be better than the Mitzrayim. Seine gewähren Yored Bar Hashem, those Mitzrayim that were afraid of Hashem's words. Und haben doch gar nicht gekannt gegen ihn, and they couldn't do it against the Eden. So he said, you will not win the physical war, you will not win spiritually. Was can you help? And he said, what could help? But the Bilam gesagt. So Bilam said, he said, come. And the Rebbe said, come means come closer. Come to Nante, come closer. And ich will euch geben an Eitze Bachshoyi. Privately, quietly, I'll give you an advice. And what was the advice? Their God hates knows, etc., etc. And for this you will reach what you're looking to do to destroy them. So that's what we learned the Pshat in Rashi here. Okay. We're not finished with everything, all the details yet. But someone who's learning Rashi could ask, then you find nicht in the ganze Arboim schon bei Midbar, as Eden sollen a ton of solch Averes. You don't find all the 40 years in the desert that the Eden should do such Averes. Such Averes we don't find. So how could this happen here that you say, Yem and Eitz and they did Averes? Nochmer goes further. Bashleimis Bas Dibri, when it says this, woman Shleimis Bas Dibri, her son cursed Hashem, Zokt Rashi, Rashi says, Shvochan Shal Yisrael, this is telling you the praise of Yidden, Leima Shilavad Zayna. She was the only Zayna amongst all of Klal Yisrael. And since we see no women were immoral, so the men were also like that. So how is it possible here that so many Yidden should stumble and do this Aveda? 24,000 Yidden died, that means 24,000 Yidden did this, and even more that the Balpay, but 24,000 Yidden did this. How is it possible? When Yidden were so careful and we know they didn't do it. Another question, which was not finished yet with explaining the whole Rashi, what is their Be'if? What is this Bilam gesagt b'derech sod? He said, Bilam said to them, you can't win by physical war, you can't win by trying to get somebody more spiritual, because you see from the Mitzvim that didn't work. Therefore, come here, quietly, I'll tell you a secret, I'll give you the advice. What's the game? Why was it a secret? Why can't it say? He told them, I'll tell you and give you an advice. That's what Rashi wants to bring from Perek Chelik. The starting with Arum Gredi Proti is via Zemin Adiden Angere Nartuch Tzirish Yayin. There it says all the details, how they tricked the Yidden into drinking wine and then getting involved in this. Wie sie seien nicht schon geworden bis Nusma mit der Zore, they stumbled over doing Nusma mit der Zore. It wasn't simple. There was a whole process here. But Mele and Yidden wollten gewusst von Atzaz Bilom. Now this was an advice. He told him, superficially, don't do that. If you send your women for snooze, it won't work. You set up tents, and you make them sell clothes, and they'll buy it, and they'll haggle for the price, and the young woman will call them in, I'll give you cheaper. The whole process. Oh, so this is only way it's possible. The kasha is, how did Eden do Shavuos? Yes, with this whole plan. So there's a whole plan here, and therefore, Bilam, when he gave this eitzah, had to say it quietly. But Eden wollten gewusst von Atzaz Bilam, if he would say it publicly, and everyone in Midian would know this eitzah, the Yidden would have heard it also. It would have come out. They would have known to be careful. They wouldn't get chatchila. They wouldn't go to those tents. So if they would know of it, what was therefore they would be careful. That's why he said it in a secret. Come to me, come quietly, I'll tell you. The Yidden shouldn't realize what is the chokhmah here that he's trying to accomplish it. That's why it says Bayu, and that answers. So when it says in Chelik, what Rashi brings from Chelik is negate to the Pshat, to answer these two things, why you had to say it as a secret, and how it's possible to do Avera. One more thing we still have to answer is, why does Rashi bring the Sifri? So, it's still not enough. It's very erzählt dort in Gemara, Gemara says exactly how they did Bilam's advice. And he says here, also lem kloyim harshelag ad beis yeshimis. They made these tents, these places, these curtains from a place harshelag till beis yeshimis ve'eshiv lem zaynis, and they put the zaynis. Skeinim b'bachutz b'yaldim b'fnim, the older one outside, the younger one inside. The shosher yisrael leichon v'sheishim v'smeichem, and the Eden were eating and drinking and happy. V'yetzin l'tayel b'shuk, and they would go for a walk, and they would pass by these tents. A menacely askenis, and the older one would say, "Come, I'll sell you this stuff, and I'll charge like this." And the younger one came out and said, "No, I'll charge you less. Come in." And that's how it got to it. Kann man wieder fragen, so when we read that Gemara, you can still ask, wie kommt sie eben als an Hage von Eichel Chulu Smeichen jetzt noch Teil Beschutz zwischen den Olden von the shape and these medium? We said Rashi brings the Gemara in Chelik. The Kasha is, how did they even come to such an Aveda? So Rashi says, look in Chelik. It says the whole process, but that doesn't really answer. Even that process is not clear. It all started because the Eden were eating and drinking, and they went among those tents of the women of Midian, and they got tricked into doing it. But what were they doing going to Lochatchila? A Yid, after he eats and drinks, goes amongst the Goyish women. Befrata does he given noch the grace of Nisan, especially as happened after the great miracles. Was Eden am Ersh gesehen. Eden just saw a miracle by Eshad and Cholim. Eshad and Cholim is the miracles when they, Rasha says, they even had to pass through a certain road, which was between two mountains. And the two mountains, the road was very narrow. So the Goyim decided that they're going to, and there were caves in the mountains, that they're going to stand in the caves, and when they didn't pass by, they're going to throw down rocks and this, and they're going to kill them. What did they wish to do? The cave had, the mountain had one side caves, and the other side like piece sticking out, that fit like a puzzle. What they wish to did, all these guys who were hiding in the caves, they wish to put the two mountains together, and it squished them, and then it started bleeding, etc., etc. These are Meiditic miracles. By Mochemes, Eig, by Eig, the miracle, Okar Tura Rashted. Now, how the Moshe Rabbeinu killed Eig. Eig was so strong, so big, that he tore out the mountain. And he thought to himself, I'm going to take this mountain and put it down on the Eden and kill all the Eden just with that. That's how strong Eig was. And Moshe Rabbeinu was scared because he think Avraham Avinu, etc., etc. But what did they wish to do? Made a miracle. Number one, he made that the Moshe make a hole in the mountain, so it came down on his neck, made a hole. Then it got stuck with his tooth. He couldn't take it out. The whole thing. And then while it was like that, Moshe Rabbeinu took an axe and chopped and hit him on his ankle, and that killed him. Made it nisim. So when Eden saw these miracles, what is doch bepashtes got arusrufen by Eden? Punkta pakete so what should they bring out by Eden? The opposite of going to the women of Midian, etc. Even before they did this, was just going there. And Hagat Teva B'Yesa should be a very good behavior. So how did the Eden at this point allow themselves to go for a walk among the women of Midian? Therefore Rashi says, look in the Sifri. Look in Sifri, a part in Sifri that will explain this inyan that it says in Perek Chelik that we just said. And so it doesn't mean the Sifri on this pasuk, because here it doesn't say anything concerning the inyan. In Sifri Parshas Bolok, in Sifri of Bolok state, as mentioned, after the Eden took a lot of loot from the war of Sichel and Eig, they were embarrassing these. In other words, they couldn't even care about it. They got so much stuff that Mekarim Ksus, Mashlichin, they would tear the clothes and throw it away. Mekarim Payment, they would tear up a payment, Mashlichin, throw it away. They didn't. They were looking for gold and silver. So what does that mean? The fact that they got so much loot in this war, given as the Edens on Zayin Matzef Vayishma Yishurin. It caused that Eden became so rich, so much, so vergrept, as we would call, so coarse. And what does the pasuk say in Parshas Hazinu? Vayishma Yishurun, Vayivad. When the Eden, Yishurun goes on Eden, become fat, Vayivad, then they kick, they go against Eibishter. So here also, so in Sifri it says that because they got so much, they became so vergrept, and therefore B'meili, the Titzor is their food. What's the result? Vayivad, they kick. Und das hat sof der führt zu der nicht guten Anoge und Kishlonachet. Because this happened, like it says in Sifri. Therefore, they allowed themselves to go for a walk amongst the women. And when they were there, already this caused them this whole process that the women did, and this caused them to do that. So we see every part of Rashi, but why Rashi brings and what Rashi needs to go through the Rashi and now back. It's going to take too much time to just review how everything is answered, but every part is answered. The Chassidus that we find in Rashi. By Mochemes Midian gefunden, By this war of Midian, we find the Rebbeinu had gesagt, what the Rebbeinu said to fight this war. He said, "Nekeim nikmas bnei Yisrael meisa Midyanim." Go take revenge on behalf of the Yidden from the Midyanim. When Moshe Rabbeinu when he gave over this commandment to the Yidden, he said that by fighting this war, loss is nikmas Hashem b'Midyan. What we're going to do, we'll fight the revenge for Hashem against Midian. Not nikmas b'nei Yisrael, not the revenge of Yidden. Is Mavayre Tatas, as the Rebbe says, my father explains, and Tamashina, the reason why Hashem said, fight the war for the sake of the Eden, and Moshe said, fight the war for the sake of the Eibishter. The Eibishter is Medagdak Akvedim Shel Yisrael. The Eibishter cares more about the covet of the Eden. So he said the problem of what they did is against the Eden. Moshe Rabbeinu is careful more for the covet of the Eibishter. That's why he says what they did is against the Eibishter. Now, that says was the Eibishter in Zayin Tzivui. And this he also explains to Rebbe's father. The Eibishter in his commandment that Magdi given in Pasha Truma, the Kruvim Fadamon. In Truma, in one posse, when David said to make the Oren and the Kruvim on top of the Oren, so at one posse, he says, I will speak to you from there. He says first the Kruvim, and then he mentions the Oren. And the Pasha's Nosei, Ber der Mon der Oren for the Kruvim Pasha. And the Pasha Nosei, when it says David spoke to Moshe from the Oren, so there it mentions first the Oren and then the Kruvim. And the Rebbe's father goes in Tarichas that the Kruvim represent Yidden, and the Oren represents the Eibishter, and therefore, in Truma, when the Eibishter said, he said the Kruvim first, because the Eibishter cares about the Yidden first, and in Pasha Nosei, he said the Oren first, because Moshe, when this was something that's about Moshe, he cares more. But anyway, so we understand what this. So the Rebbe says a very simple thing, that the Eibishter cares about the Yidden about the Eibishter. Darf aber verstehen. We have to understand, for was gefindt man dem Shinui und die zwei Unionen bei Melchemes Midian und nicht bei alle anderen Zivuim. Why is in this case Dafka as the Torah mentioned this? According to the Rebbe's father, that the reason this Shinui is, this change is because of the Eibishter cares for the Eden care for the Eibishter. Only here it's like that. You could have found this idea in other mitzvahs also. Why Dafka here? Later as born in Pidish Rasha now that's Mavur. But according to what we said in Rasha, it's going to be explained. Because what the Rebbe explained in Rasha is like this. The Melchama for Midian and the Eden is Bashanim and Tzvei Yefanim. The Muhammad, the war of the Midyanim, of Midian against the Eden was twofold. Number one, they gewollt Muhammad halten und bringen Eden. They wanted to destroy the Eden. So they wanted to destroy the Eden, so we have to take revenge for the Eden. Then the second thing is the Eitzah was Bilam Agigeb Malakim Shalei Sein Nazima. The Eitzah that Bilam gave, which is also part of the war, as the Rebbe, that's the whole Chiddush of the Rebbe in the Sikha, it's part of the war. But it's a war against who? It's a Yidden should sin, but it'll come out against the Eibishter. And then kegen them is the Rinja for Nikmas Hashem. And for that is in the comment for the Eibishter's sake. Because the Bilam, part of the way he fought the war, is the war against the Eibishter. It's a war against Yidden, a war against the Eibishter. Therefore, the Eibishter, was is medagte bekvedim shel Yisrael, the Eibishter cares more about the covet of the Yidden, is von die zwei. Out of these two things, which both of them are by the war, which one is he stressing? He's madgish nitmas bnei Yisrael. He stresses more that they wanted to destroy the Eden. They kavonum to bring the Eden, take them the comma for the Eden, because what they cared about that they wanted to destroy the Eden. Moshe Rabbeinu was his medagdak akwina shalakadosh baruch. Moshe, who cares about the covet of the Eibush, it is madgish. He stresses nikmas Hashem. We have to take revenge out for Hashem's sake. As eich zeir umbringen Eden is given to the pula kegnel came shalilu. The Taka wanted to destroy the Eden. In which way did they want to destroy the Eden? Because they wanted Eden to go against the Eibishter. But saying the Huzima, the Eibishter hates adultery. These Sumachshazain and Avodah Zarah, they finally went to the Avodah Zarah, Balpeh. So they went against, so this is all based on the Sikha before. The Sikha before is, if not for the Sikha, what would you say? That first they wanted to fight a war, and then they couldn't, he told me he can't. And then what happened to fail? He made them do Avedas. That's not part of the war. He got another way to get rid of them. He says, no, this is one war that has two pratim. The question is, which of the two pratim counts most? So by the Eibishter, which prat counted most? The fact that they wanted to destroy the Eden Pashat. And the second one is that they wanted to Eden to do, Bilah wanted the Eden to do the Avedas against the Eibishter, and that's how they will be destroyed. But he can express it against the Eibishter. But this explains also why Rashi explains on the words Nikmas Hashem. When Moshe said, let's fight the Nekoma, the revenge for Hashem, so Rashi says, Sho'emid Keneged Yisrael, Ki Emid Neged HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Someone that goes against Yidden is like it goes against the Eibishter. But the Torah Zogt is Dafke by Melchemes Midian. Where does the Torah say this? Here. The same thing. The Torah could have said this someplace else also. But in them, hat me gesehen, as in Zeir Ufste Neged Yisrael, because here you saw actually how they're going against the Yidden, is given stellen sich Neged Havai, Neged Hashem. See, like this we say, every time the Goy wants to fight the Yid, really means Hashem, true. Here we saw it. The war that they were fighting to destroy the Eden was a war through fighting the Eibishter. So really, it was fighting the Eibishter. Mach shall sein Eden mit Zima, und durch dem ich habe die Zorre, to make the Eden stumble and do the Aveda of Snus, and also have the Zorre. And the Iber sagt, the Torah, do, in Parshas Matos, dafke bidvar bilam. That's why here the Torah says the word bidvar bilam, nicht nur Deitza. Nicht nur Atzaz bilam, not only his advice. From those, geht zu verstehen, the Mechuben von Melchemes Midian, because here, when they had the war against Midian, by having the words bidvar bilam, we understand what the war was. Was his nikmas Hashem and nikmas Yisrael. Because it's bidvar bilam, he started by saying, you want to fight a war with soldiers, you won't win. That was not the Eitzah. That's part of his discussion. But here it's negated to know that teaches us by saying that he said you can't win the war begashmias. Elamai, I'll give you the Eitzah, is a simon that the Eitzah was also part of the war. But Mela, the war itself had two things. So what they were doing is against the Yidden and against the Eibishter, because the way they wanted to win was through Zima, which is the Eibishter. So now after we say Bidvar Bilam, the Rashi explains, we understand already the Teichon of this war. That's why here the Pasuk says Bidvar Bilam. Over there the Pasuk doesn't say, because there it's not, there was no Muhammad there. There it just says what happened. So Rashi says Atzaz Bilam, that's it. Here when it's when you're talking about the war, Rashi explains the whole beard, the way this is negated to the war.